I didn't see myself as a writer. I never thought that it was something that I actually was good at.
Kim Johnson was mistaken. Her piece of literary activism was well received.
Time runs my life, a constant measuring of what's gone and what's to come. Jamals' 100-meter dash is a blazing 10.06 seconds. That's how my older brother got this monumental interview. I'm not thinking about Jamals' record, though. I'm thinking about Daddy's time. 7 years. 2,532 days served, to be exact. This running clock above my head's been in place since his conviction. That moment branded me.
This Is My America tells a story of the criminal justice system that happens all too often.
I think I was so frustrated.
With you tonight, and welcome my guest, Kim. Are you there, Kim?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hello. Hello. I can hear you and see you. Let me just tell
This is
you
great.
right now, we are going to be BFFs. We're already BFFs because you wrote this book.
Because our lipstick matches. Oh, okay.
There's that piece. And because there was so much in this book that I personally related to, and I was not expecting that when I read it. I was not expecting that. So let me tell you now, as the president of the Spokane NAACP, I just have been in office now for a little over a month, about a month and a half. And my goal is really to help our organization around connectedness in our community, right? And so I want to help those who are watching this event tonight, help them also connect with the characters in your book, because that to me is so important, and it tells so many underlying stories that unless you have lived as a Black person in America, you really could almost miss these things. So why don't we start by talking about the main characters, of course, the Beaumonts. Tell me about how you got there and just explain a little bit about the history of the Beaumont family.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so great to be here. I'm already feeling your energy, so this is going to be great. I really wanted a family that was very tight knit. Because there are so many misconceptions about families that have, incarceration sort of impacting or the carceral state, and they talk about broken families and all these other components. And so it was really, really important to me that the reader could see not only what an amazing family it is, but that empathy of, this is a horrible thing to actually happen to this family. And so I wanted to make sure that there was a strong sibling relationship. I'm a family of I have two sisters. I'm the middle sister. I wanted there to be a sort of a younger sibling so people can think about caring for the future and what does that future look like. It was so important for me to have an older brother that was loving, and people just sort of like this image of this perfect kid that even in his perfect life, that there are things that are outside of his control. And so from the father, James, who has been in prison for 7 years, I also wanted to make sure that people knew that he was still Tracy's father. He was still, in a loving relationship with his wife. All of those elements to me were really important to tell a story beyond what I think people typically talk about in terms of Black pain, right? Or,
Right.
These issues of this particular trauma. I wanted to also be healing as a part of the story, and being able to see a family that loves each other.
Oh, I thought it was really amazing how Mr. Beaumont, you could tell that although he was incarcerated, he was actively parenting. He was actively
Mm-hmm.
parenting from behind those bars. And I think that that is a piece that people often do not realize, that that actually happens, that parents are still connected to their families, they're still connected to their communities, they still have all of the same cares that we all have who are not incarcerated, but they have that veil
Mm-hmm.
that sort of creates more complexity to how they parent. But he was very, very active. I love that he could also tell just by looking at the kids when
Yep.
they came to visit, and looking at his wife when she came to visit. He could tell if they were going through something, or if there was something on their heart that they needed to talk to him about. So that to me let me know that he was very emotionally connected to them. Let me tell you about this thing. The other thing that happened, and I was not expecting this. So I am the first of my grandmother's grandchildren, right? So I'm the oldest grandchild in my family. And because of that, my grandmother raised me essentially most of my childhood. And she raised me with my aunts and uncles, but more like siblings, right? So I was their
Mm-hmm.
baby sister, and they were my sisters and brothers versus aunts and uncles. And three of my uncles for over 20 years experienced long stints of time, or as they called them, bids.
Mm-hmm.
They did some long bids, you know, a
Mm-hmm.
15 piece. My uncle Eric did a 24 piece. And so
Mm-hmm.
in that time, I can, as I started to read the book, I remembered back to my grandmother literally not wanting information to get to my uncles so that they didn't get
Mm-hmm.
worried about what was going on the outside. I literally remembered that. I remembered writing letters to their attorneys. So it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
the X project, but it was to their attorneys or whoever my family thought might be able to help them. And so all of that just made the character so real for me, because I thought, how does Kim
Yeah.
know my business? How does she know my business? But it was really true. It was true. And the amount of weight that Tracy carried as that person
Mm-hmm.
who was seen as the strong character in the family, the person that needed to keep pushing things along, even when her mother was weak and, tired. She was the one that really like held the family together and knew that there was a better outcome available for her dad. Unbelievable. I was worn out as soon as I realized who she actually was. Now, tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about Jamal, because that's the thing. Jamal was a very interesting character too, because he was not the typical young black guy. He wasn't. He
Mm-hmm.
wasn't in one way, and then in one way he was, in that he was good at sports. He was, he excelled at that. And you could tell that as a young black man, he understood the weight of what that could mean for his family. You do well, you get picked up for, one of the big schools, and how that can really change your family's life. Who did you think about when you were including Jamal's characters into this book?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of young people. I worked in higher ed almost 20 years and in the service organizations that I am. And I just love being around young people and seeing the beauty of their growth, but the possibility. And I think when I was writing, I was thinking of Jamal. I wanted him to embody all of the possibilities, the hopes and dreams that often come with a Black family, of thinking that even with all the hardships that occurred, that there is still some possibility. And so I immediately wanted people to love Jamal, to sort of see him in the people that they know, the one that people are rooting for, the one that there is a lot of weight of being the oldest too, that I really wanted to emphasize, in that, he is sort of setting the groundwork for the rest of the family about what is possible. And so, I was thinking about how to balance that though with the story, because I think oftentimes, there is this particular stereotype of a Black man going to college and playing sports and those kinds of things. But I also felt that is very true to the culture about different ways that you actually can access education. And so I try to choose an alternative kind of sport. He runs track. I selected track as something that I felt, what would be something that if he can't control a lot that's going on in his world. What can he control? And thinking about an athlete so much, you pour so much into your body, and especially, you know, running track, you control yourself. There's no one else around you that can control what you do. And I wanted that sort of symbolism with Jamal, and giving him the ability to something, but I also wanted him to be academic, for him to be fun loving, and all these other elements, so that if something occurred to him, that people could start to think about who are all the other, you know, Black men or Black and brown people who we didn't go deep enough. And I think a lot of it comes from the inspiration during the time period of when I was writing, really thinking about my inspiration with the Black Lives Matter movement, and how the media was so it is and continues to be so very focused on either the bodies of Black people, not the humanity of Black people. And I wanted that to sort of speak to readers, so that if a case comes up on TV and you don't know anything about the particular person, you might think about, you know, are they a brother? Are they, you know, a son? Who are they to the people that matter to them? And so that piece was really, really important to me in his story. And kind of just going back to the Tracy connection, you know, I haven't had her specific experience, but I know a lot of people who have. The drive that she had was specifically from thinking about myself as a young activist. My first engagement of activism actually was with the NAACP. I'm still a member. I'm not active in a chapter, but I still hold my membership because of how much it meant to me as a young person, feeling like my voice could be powerful, and there was energy towards that. And I wanted young people who, when I was, you know, Tracy's age back then, I didn't have a text to go to. I didn't have a book that had a teen character who was using their voice, driving for change, fighting for something. You know, if it was usually something was happening to them, but they had not a lot of agency to figure that out. And so it was really important to me to honor that story, and in particular of so many Black women who are ahead of movements, leading movements, or they're holding it down for the family when these situations occur. And even though, you know, the criminal justice system impacts Black women also, there is an added weight and burden and stereotype around Black men. And so often it is the Black women who are sort of left to keep the family together. And I wanted all of that to be sort of wrapped up in this Tracy character.
Well, let me tell you, you are officially an honorary member of the Spokane NAACP.
Thank you.
As of today, you are a Spokane NAACP member. That's all too. And we certainly, I'm sure all of the chapters and the chapter there where you are in Portland appreciate your continued support. One thing that I also felt really soon, really early on in the book, was that it's interesting how society, and I'll say white America, really values young Black athletes, and in the same breath devalues Black men altogether. So that I thought that was really interesting, like the when he went on the television show and he was there to really celebrate his accomplishments and what he was doing, but then how quickly that turned to the news saying, you know, he's a murderer or a thug or whatever. And so that to me was really, like, I felt that deeply, that how is it that it is the same person, it's the same body, it's the same Black human being that in one light at one time can be like the most valuable, most entertaining thing that you are a part of, and then you can easily crucify, you know, so quickly. So that stuck out to me a lot.
Yeah, and I connect to it a lot. I mean, I think because we see it, that, like, you know, that one moment that you don't have an opportunity to ever defend yourself. Once it happens, you are marked, and I try to tell that story throughout, that, you know, that the mark sort of impacted the family. You know, but my husband was an athlete, And, he had to experience all kinds of bias and difficulty. He's a twin brother. They both were athletes. And even their friends that, some of them who, went on to be in the NFL, and had something happen to them and spent 10 years in prison. And so for me, that story was so real of, it's just in a moment, in an instant, something can change. So
and it happens so quickly. So, back to saying that what I want is for people to connect with these characters. That's what I wanted, as if I was representing your book or something. But I wanted people to connect and really understand that, like, this is real. These are real experiences. Although it's a fictional character, the Beaumont family is fictional, but these are real experiences that Black families go through when they are justice involved, we'll call it. Let me tell you who was my next favorite character, and I want you to tell me all that went into this person. Sister Officer Sergeant Beverly. Now you know that is law enforcement for people of color. To get into law enforcement, you are already, seen through so many different lenses, and sometimes from your community you become the enemy the moment that you sign on and take that oath and that pledge to be a police officer or to be in law enforcement. And so I think you did a really great job of showing sort of the tension of that for Officer Beverly, because she of course she took the oath. Even in the scene when she was in the kitchen with him and she was going to take Jamal in, she said, "I have to take you in. I have to take you in. I can't leave here without you going too. Now, I don't want them to hurt you. I don't want this to go bad, but I have to do my job too." So tell me a little bit about how you developed really the complexity of Officer Beverly's character.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like within the Black community, we all have a member that we know that is in law enforcement. I think that there's this sort of assumption that we actually don't have people that we know. When I was growing up, the chief of police was my cousin. Um, and that sort of like tension about the feeling of fear of an officer, while at the same time actually knowing someone. And I really try to play with the tension, the relationship between Quincy as the sibling of Beverly, and sort of their particular perspectives. And I think the story of wanting to have power and wanting to have control and wanting to make change, and people choosing different paths towards that. For Tracy, it's activism and her voice in journalism, media, organizing, like that is her voice and her power. With Beverly, I think I really wanted to tell the story of, she felt like she could actually make things better.
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning of the story, we learn that her father was actually killed by police, and he was
Mm-hmm.
suspected of doing the same crime that Tracy, the main character's father, also did. And they grew up with that. Their family grew up with that mark too. And so I wanted to have a young, another young, strong Black woman character that was really important to me. I wanted lots of models of what that could look like and the different experiences that they have, but also just showing that just because you're a Black officer doesn't mean you also don't operate under the blue laws, right? So like part of you is still blue. You're still in a system. You still have to prove yourself. There still is a
Mm-hmm.
culture, but she really tried to fight through it. And I try to be careful about, there's a lot going on in my book. And I think for me, I wanted people to have a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
about all the different choices and ways, and even Beverly's choice to become an officer after what happened to her. Like, being even really critical of, you've actually seen it go really bad. How can you stand for that? But then her being able to say, I want to make change. I'm trying to do something different. She has different kind of aspirations for that. And so, yeah, it was really important to me to have that representation, to have it be a Black woman, and a young Black woman, and thinking about the possibilities as I guess. And, in the time that I was writing it, I read many years ago Angela Davis's, Prison the Obsolete. I never thought that when my book would come out, that conversations around abolition and defunding the police and all of those kinds of things, that was never even in my like vernacular to like publicly talk about, right? So
Mhm.
even my framing and thinking about it, um I wonder how I would have written it if it would have been now, right? If I would have been writing it now, would I have had a different perspective? But I believe that the conversation is important. And I love the Beverly character. Like I really,
Mhm.
I really enjoyed her character because I felt like when I was writing her, I felt like I knew her. I felt like I knew what she was trying to do and who she was trying to be and what she was trying to stand for.
As a side, one thing that I thought about with Beverly also is the importance of being able to diversify police forces and having
Hmm.
diversity in these law enforcement arenas. Like, we need to have that because the truth is, when Beverly showed up at the house, although she was
Hmm.
in her uniform and although she was,
Hmm.
there on official business, there was something that they could, that family, the Beaumonts, could relate to because she was a person
Yeah.
of color. She was a Black woman, and so they knew that to a certain degree she understood, what they were experiencing on a level that maybe a white officer could not. And so, how
Hmm.
do you think?
Hmm.
How can we address being able to diversify law enforcement and have more people of color get into this field of work that technically we technically need them because they do make a lot of individuals who have to have connection with the police a little more comfortable just in their very skin, just the presence of skin that looks like mine. I feel a little more comfortable with a system that is definitely not shown itself to be friendly towards me and people of color.
Yeah, it's so complicated because I think leadership and culture make all the difference in the world about how successful someone will be, in that area. And I do believe, we could have a whole other conversation on policing and all of that. But I do believe currently, right now, we still have law enforcement. It's still very important. People are paying attention to these conversations, and we kind of have to go with the masses of like pushing to have more people, while at the same time I still feel that there needs to be a lot of work on how, what psychological profile are we looking at when people choose to go into law enforcement? Because if you've looked at studies and even FBI investigations of increasing white supremacist folks being recruited into particular field areas of law enforcement, like we have to look at that also. And I sort of it's hard for me to sort of like pull apart those two, because I
Mhm.
think that we need the increase of people of color within the field. And then we also have to look at the sort of the psychological profile and what's happening with people who are in these positions, and how do you actually break the culture that I think is so hard to do in a community that they have to have each other's back. Like I get that. Like I understand why they have to have each other's back. Um, but there has to be a disruption of at what level. And I think you can look at, police unions and the purpose of what they're doing and how they're doing. Are they there to support officers? That's what their job is. Their job actually isn't, a union isn't actually to support the community. And so again, I can talk all about the sort of the complexities, but I do think it's important. um, I do think that sort of translation, and there has to be more than one. I think a lot of
Yes.
our areas, especially looking in the Pacific Northwest, um, oftentimes people think that one is going to change something. The
No.
same way that we looked at Barack Obama as president, that he, as one man, could unpack the legacy that began in 1619 on, he couldn't do that without, he can't do anything with that unless there's mobilization and more people and you know, all of that, all of those pieces. And I think it's very, very similar, is that you can't go with just a few higher, you actually have to have a mass, you have to have a
You do.
cluster, a group who can disrupt the way that the system has been created.
I think the other thing that happens when you just have one or two or a few is that you ultimately end up doing harm to that officer or
Hmm.
those few officers,
Hmm.
because the level of um, extreme torture they must feel being one of a few in that situation has to be, you know, harmful. It has to be harmful. And so when you do, like you said, bring several in, make it a mass, then what you do is also create a collective community for the officers of color who are there
Hmm.
and who are fighting against this system that has, again, not always been good to people that look like us. So you're absolutely
Hmm.
right about that. And in figuring out how do you make this, how do you make this field of law enforcement and the possibility of change interesting enough for people to want to get be a part of it.
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
Hmm.
And so I think all police
Hmm.
departments everywhere probably are having that challenge, but especially here in the Pacific Northwest. In most of the police departments in the Pacific Northwest, you can count on, you know, one or two hands. Here, I think it's one
Yeah.
hand. Portland, it's probably
Hmm.
one hand. In Seattle, it might be
Hmm.
two hands of actual Black officers or officers of color. Like it's just so slim that,
Hmm.
you know, that has to, you know, I think about how that is affecting them mentally and how that affects their ability to do their work well when they're under such extreme pressure, kind of like
Yeah.
Barack Obama was. Yes. So
Yep.
that's interesting. The other thing for me that just was, I thought, genius in how you did this was all of the layers of intersectionality in the story. You know, I thought you have this underlying story of this Black young woman who is having this sort of crush relationship on this young white boy, and then you have, you know, the coming of age sort of story that's kind of happening with her and Quincy. That's happening all at the
Hmm.
same time, and then you have the, you know, the mom and the mom working for a person, working for the woman who knew about the things that had happened in that town. It's just, it was just so many layers. And like I said, I think that we could read this book, and those who have not read it yet certainly could read the book, get to the end, understand the story. But if they stop and take enough time to really see who these people are, then they will understand the story differently. I also thought that
Hmm.
this is probably very different if a Black person reads it and a white person reads it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you heard feedback about that, or what are folks saying?
Yeah, it's interesting. My conversations are really different. At all, you know, my conversations with young people are really different than with older people. You know, and I think it's for, again, going back to growing up and living in the Pacific Northwest and having to navigate being a Black person in a majority white community. Um, I think code switching. And I feel like when I was writing it, I was writing those layers there because I know them so well. You know,
Yeah.
I know what that life is like, is that you can be in the same room and be experiencing two very different kinds of experiences. And
Can
how do
you
you
say
tell
that
that in a
again? Say
story?
that part again. Say that again, because you're speaking for
It could
you
be.
and for me. So repeat that part.
Yeah, just being in the same room and having two very different experiences, or navigating one room to another, like physically doing that. You know, the way in which you sort of perceive information and communicate and talk and all of those things are really different. And so you know, that's why it was important to me, because of the conversations that I wanted to have in this story, that I knew that I wanted to be able to have other characters, and you know, more than having non-Black characters in the story. And because there's so many layers, I felt like the dynamic between Black and white was probably the most important thing for me to sort of focus on, thinking about, you know, the younger generation with Dean, and being around a lot of young white kids who were talking about social justice, and their friends are diverse, but that anti-racist work still needs to happen. So even the relationship with Tracy and Dean, when a scenario would come up, Tracy didn't need to protect him or shield him from stuff. He needed to sit in his feelings a bit. And I wanted to model that about what that looks like. And then, older white characters, and I don't want to do any spoilers, but like some of the older white characters in this story, I also wanted there to be a conversation of where are you in being a bystander? And I didn't have this language before until Dr. Ibram Kendi came out with sort of anti-racist work, but I really started to realize and reflect when I was writing, that's really what I was doing, is that you might say that you're not, you're, of course I'm not racist, but like, how are you actively, being anti-racist? And there was a lot of actions in this story that should have occurred if you really wanted to be anti-racist. That could have stopped a lot in this story. Without going into detail, but stopped a lot.
Absolutely. And one thing
yeah.
thing I'll tell you too is that part of this conversation that I'm constantly having with people around the NAACP really is what does anti-racist work look like? How do I do that? How do I actually show up in that way? What does it mean to be a co-conspirator? Like, give me real-time steps. And this book helped me to think of a quick one I could say to folks when they ask that. A quick one is tell what you see. How about that? Tell what you see. Do not hide these things that are wrong. You have to bring them to attention. You have to say something. That is really the first step in anti-racist work is say what you know. Say what you know. Because if you do that, then you will get the conversation going around these truths that we as Black people are constantly trying to get people to believe. I feel like that's what we spend a lot of our time doing, trying to help people understand our position, our stance, our experience. If there were white people that would step up and just say, no, that did happen. I saw it. I saw it. I know about it. My dad was in the Klan. I know about what they do. I know how it happened. That would really get us so much further in this work. So that post reading this book is really going to become my very first, step to say to folks when they say, how do I do it? A tale. Let's start there. Yeah. So tell me, I also want to know about, which I can tell you in my heart when this happened, when I read this, I thought, ooh, I don't know where this is going. When we found out that Jamal was seeing the young lady, it took me back. My son is 30 years old, and it took me back to when he was about 17 or so here in the Pacific Northwest. We were living in Seattle at the time, and he started really like dating. That's when the dating kind of got serious. And I remember that the first girl he told me about was this girl named Maddie. And so, Mama, I like Maddie so much, and Maddie's so this and so that. And so I, as his mother, as his Black mother, said, Maddie, you be careful. You be careful. And I think that's what all Black parents, all Black mothers of sons have to tell their sons. Be careful, because although Jamal didn't do anything wrong with her, they had a really innocent, relationship, a really pure liking of each other. It still had the potential to lead to something so negative in his life. And if we pretend not to see that reality, well, problematic, because that's real. That's real. That is real. So you tell me, what is it that you want people to take away from this story? Those who haven't read it yet, what do you want them to read it and say, see, and feel?
Yeah, I mean, you said a lot of it earlier, is that when I wrote this story, I want different readers with sort of coming from a different lens to have different kind of takeaways. There's an undertone that if you're a Black reader, you're picking up all of these nuances. You're picking up, you know, being displaced, coming, you already knew their backstory from a little line in the book about them getting on the bus to Texas. You already knew what that story was. And so for me, for my Black readers, I wanted them to see themselves. But the most important thing I would say for Black readers in particular is a call to action and to see that you have agency, to see yourselves in a lot of the different characters and the different choices that you make. Yeah, and so that was really important to me. For I think for all of my readers, I wanted them to see how they can play a role. How can they be vigilant in their own communities to being, now you read it, now you're aware of it. An author's note in the back, there are resources, there are books in the back. The books that are on that list were now the New York Times bestsellers list. And you know, I wanted readers to be able to have something to then, when they're done reading, that they can go towards for that. And did I lose you a little? Am I still here?
No, you're here. I see you.
Okay, good. Oh, perfect. Yeah, sorry. Um, and you know, and you said it earlier too, like being able to read the story and actually pausing and thinking about, do I need to read it again? And I did write it as a page turner because I love page turners. But I work with a lot of young people, and I know that once you grip them in the story, then you'll be able to sort of keep them on that story. And sometimes you might read it too fast because you're trying to get to the end because you're so nervous the whole time, and you have to sort of go back and pause. But yeah, my big takeaways are, you know, this is systemic. The past is the present. And it will continue to, our past will continue to be the present unless we actually address it and change things. That it's important for people to be vigilant, have agency, and that, you know, there's still a family that have hopes and wants and dreams and possibilities, and there is so much out of their control to do that, and yet they still have hope. And so in your life, what can you do to actually help advance that, and you know, help move that forwards, because we can't do it alone. You know, we have been doing it mostly alone.
Will you say that
um,
again? Turn your mic on and say that. We cannot do it alone.
we can't do it alone because
No.
we didn't create the problem, and so we can't actually create the solution on our own. And something that you said earlier that I think is really important, especially for those that want to be anti-racist and do that work, is that it is uncomfortable. I recognize that, but it also is uncomfortable for me every single day in my life at least one moment. That I have that discomfort, that I have learned how to navigate my life. I've been successful. I've been able to, you know, to do that. But it's hard. It's hard work just existing, being Black in this country. And you will never feel that pain as a sort of like observer, right? To it. And so if I can do it, if you can do it, you know, you could be a part of that. And I think that's a piece that has been so unaddressed in our country about, you know, that you do need to feel that discomfort. You do need to recognize white supremacy and where it came from. We have to. We have to recognize it, because if we don't, you know, it's, you know, I've been talking about this a lot. It's like these untended roots that our nation has never healed with. And you put a skyscraper on top of, you know, unburied ground, it is going to topple. And I think that has been white supremacy in our country, because we have sort of, you know, put everything over it on top and hoping that it will keep things stable when we haven't done the groundwork. We haven't done the things beneath it to actually be on stable, strong ground.
And helping people understand that to do the groundwork at this point, okay, so to come now to the table, to the chair, to the wherever you are, to come and say, you know what, I see this, it's wrong, I can stand up for it now, that does not mean that you are then turning on your people. You are not turning your back on white culture. That's not what that is. You're simply saying this cannot continue. Now that I see, I know better, it has to stop now. It has to stop. And
Hmm.
I have to be a part of helping it to stop. Because like you said, it's
Hmm.
overwhelming. For those of us who do this work, it is overwhelming. It's overwhelming.
Hmm.
It's like the very thing that
And the
hurts you, you're expected to keep being hurt by it.
Yeah, and the kind of influence, I like that you're co-conspirators. I love that language. Being a co-conspirator in this work, uh, you could have conversations that I never actually have access to because you have family members and friends and an entire community. You actually can do so much work in a space that I actually can't, I can have access to because I'm not in those sort of deep relationships in a way. And I think that is powerful. And I think people should see it as that is actually powerful work that they can do within their community, within their families, within the children that they raise, the conversations they have with their parents and grandparents.
Well, we have to remember, Kim, that it's not just me and you talking, although it should be. So we do have folks who have some questions. And I'm going to read you one of the questions. Let's see. This is from a student. Let's see. Yes, we are reading this as a class. Why did you decide to use fictional characters for some real life victims of police violence? For example, Calvin Pascal instead of Khalif Browner. And please say if there is going to be a movie. Oh, wait, let me answer that about the movie thing. So, two things. I believe that this book, although it is set up to be a book for youth and young adults, I really think it's a great book for adults because it is gentle enough that
Mhm.
you can actually see what is happening, and it is non-threatening enough where you don't feel personally responsible, but you can see the wrong in it. So I think this should be for adults, absolutely. And my vote on the movie thing, tell him Kiantha said, as if that matters, that this needs to be a movie. Bottom line. And actually, what I thought about this too today, I could see it as a movie, but I could also see it as a stage
Mhm.
play. And the reason why
Mm,
the
mhm.
stage play is really interesting is because there is something visceral that happens when you watch theater and you're right there and it's right in front of you and you're seeing real time movement. That's something really unique and special that you don't get in
Yeah.
movies. So I could see that. So call Tyler Perry or somebody, tell him to make this
Okay,
into a movie.
yes. Thank you.
Are you
Yeah,
thinking of that?
well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I could definitely see that. I hadn't thought about the play, but I totally see. I mean, I love plays. I love stage plays, but I had never made that connection. But absolutely. Going to the student's question, I love that your class is reading it. I want to thank your teacher for putting this book into your classroom. I am an educator. I'm an administrator. I wrote with that in mind about the hope that the students that I receive at college would have had something before they get to college, because so many young people that I work with are so shocked to start to take all of a sudden all these classes around these, history or ethnic studies or, Black studies or any of that, and are shocked that they didn't learn about these things earlier. And so for me, writing that text in that way is what I wanted to do. Um, I believe there's power in um, fiction as a way to open the door for people to empathize and live in the shoes of someone else. Um, I read Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy right around 2015, and that was really the moment for me that I actually started thinking about the Beaumont family, because I've followed his work. I think he's a modern day hero, who has dedicated his life to helping free those that have been unjustly sentenced, or mistreated or forgotten. Um, and so if your class is reading This Is My America, ask your teacher to also bring in the young adult version of Just Mercy, because for me, I'm a student of history. I love nonfiction. I read Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow, The Color of the Law, Ghost of an Innocent Man. I mean, I've read all of that work before I actually started writing my work. But I saw there was something really beautiful that Brian Stevenson did in humanizing the stories of the people that he worked with, that I felt how powerful it would be to be able to fictionalize this and make it feel very real, because there are so many cases. I've listened to, I've talked to people, obviously, but I've also listened to so many people's testimonies about their experiences, and all of that is sort of, I think, the groundwork in the story. And so that's why I really wanted to choose fiction. I love young adult literature. I believe literary activism is what I was, put on this planet to do. It just took me a very long time to get to that place. And I hope to tell more stories that people can see themselves in different ways, different experiences.
They can see themselves and they can see others in different
Mm-hmm.
ways. That's the important piece, that you not only see yourself, but you can see the experiences of another person. Because if you do
Mm-hmm.
that, I say it all the time, almost like a broken record. That's the stuff that changes the world, when you help people to see other people. Help them see other people.
Mm-hmm.
So we have another question from Mary, and Mary is an adult. So how do we model behavior for our kids, neighbors, and peers to be allies?
I
That's
think
a
you
good
have
one.
to do the work. It's a good one. Thank you, Mary. It's a good one, and I think it's a hard one. Um, but I've really started to um, adjust how I talk about this, because I'm in an environment that I'm in an educational environment, and I have people who care a lot and they want to help, and often I'm sending them resources and giving people a lot of stuff to look at, but I'm spending time looking at that stuff to provide it. And a lot of that is accessible to other people. And so I think the modeling is not asking other people to sort of, that their first inclination to ask other people, especially those communities that are minoritized, to provide you with those resources, but to actually try to do some groundwork. There's some incredible books, and especially now, there's so many talks and other things that you can get to. The other is, I think it's so important to provide stories to your family that don't just represent your identity, and not just, I write social justice stories. I'm incredibly passionate about them. I love to read them. And my kids, I have a 13-year-old son and a soon to be 7-year-old daughter. Her birthday is this week.
Tell her
I
Auntie
want
Kiantha said happy birthday.
um, I want them to read. I want, my son just finished reading Just Mercy, and we've been talking about that book. But I also give him stories about Black joy, and I think it's important, in terms of the modeling, that you don't create Black people's experiences just based on pain, just based on slavery and civil justice, civil rights. It is important. It is very important to know that history, but it cannot be the only thing that you know about the Black community. We love and we have romance, and we have comedy, and we have all of the same things, and so I think that if you can start that at a young age, I think that is just incredible to how it can actually help build the next generation. But for the other answer is to do the work, do the good modeling, check your bias. When you recognize that you're sort of doing something. And the last thing that I've been trying to talk about more and more, because my work is so around this time period connected to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. But I also try to talk about, don't forget Ahmaud Arbery, because it was the policing, and not police, but it was the policing of him and what he should and shouldn't do. And all of these stories that we see about the barbecue Becky and the someone who's calling there, oftentimes the police don't arrive unless you call them. And so I think you have to look at, what are you looking at where you're sort of choosing who you call the police on or who you don't? Who are the people that you just let them be in the park? Let them play their music, that if they look the same as you, would you still call them? Would you still do that? And I think that's really important, to model that acceptance of other people and check that bias, about what's happening.
So this is the final question, and I am just really irritated that our time is up. But I will just go ahead and tell you. The people want to know, how long did it take for you to write this book? How long?
It's hard for me because there's starts and stops, but I really started thinking hard about this work and sort of like, brainstorming in my head around 2015, and then seriously writing maybe the first like 10,000 words of the novel in 2016, and then got really, really serious in 2017. So I'd say it took me about a year and a half. And then my revisions, another year working with my agent. And then it was like another year working with my editor just to get it copy edited and all of that. So yeah, it's hard for me to like sort of like piecemeal all of that. But it took a couple years, for me to write this.
Well, I can certainly tell you, Kim, and I'm sure that as you do these conversations and book tours and all of the wonderful things that are going to happen as a result of this piece of work, that we certainly, as a community, appreciate those years that you invested that time into writing this book, because it's so important. And again, it just tells the story in so many different layers that I think that it will bring happiness, it will bring enlightenment, it will bring understanding to people who take the time to actually read it. And I will be looking for the movie or the stage play. Make sure you send me my tickets.
Kiantha said.
Kiantha said. Yes, and let's get that going right away. And really, like, it's just been such a pleasure to talk to you and to get a chance to meet you. I knew that we would be good friends as soon as I saw you. I knew that it happened.
Yes.
And I want to thank you to several people, actually. Thank you to Virtual Passages, Virtual Northwest Passages. Thank you to the Wishing Tree Books for this collaboration with the NAACP. Thank you, Kim. Thank you to your editor. Thank you to everybody who had a part in this book coming to life, because it's really special. And I will be certainly looking for the next one.
Thank you so much. This has been a joy. I will need to meet you someday. We'll make it happen someday.
We'll do it. I'll come to Portland, or you can come here. If you come here, come over for dinner. I'll have you over for dinner. And yeah, we'll talk about this, because I think this is interesting. I'd love to even have a group of young people from Spokane to have the opportunity to meet you too. That's the other thing that, young Black kids and young kids of color, period, need a chance to like be able to touch this stuff. They need to be able to touch success and see it and feel it and smell it and know that it's no different. They can have it all. They can have that.
Yeah.
And the way that we assure that that can happen is if we give them an opportunity to see it in real life. So thank you for that. And I look forward to seeing you soon. I think we have some giveaways that are going to happen now. Christy,
we do.
Hello.
Hello. Bum, bum. I am just so happy to be a part of this, sort of help bring This is America to Spokane. We have traditional giveaways with the Northwest Passage events at the end of every live event, and we finally figured out how to do it virtually. So the first thing we're going to give away is the very storied and everybody covets, we call it the Andy Warhol version of the Spokesman-Review tower. So pardon me while I share my screen, and then up will come a wheel. Bum, ba-dum. Share. Yes, indeed. This is the full screen wheel of names that is all 100 people that RSVP'd for tonight's event. So watch out. We will spin, and the first person will get the Andy Warhol print. Ruby Siegel. Congratulations, Ruby. I will be sure to get your address off of when you registered for tickets. The next part, the next giveaway is going to be a copy of This Is My America, which I hesitate to give away. However, I know I can get another one at Wishing Tree Books. And again, for Wishing Tree Books to collaborate with us and the NAACP to bring this event to you is really exciting. And we will be doing more YA or young adult books coming up with Wishing Tree. I think the next one is in March, March 18th. The author is Adrienne Kisner, and the book is called 6 Angry Girls. However, let's give away this. If you actually already have a copy of this, when I email you, you can tell me, hey, I already got that one, and you can give it to somebody else if you would like. Let's go back to there. We Ruby Siegel, the winner, and let's spin again. Patricia Hogg, yay! Thank you again for joining us in Northwest Passages and the virtual event tonight. And we look forward to seeing you later in the week with the book is called Girls with Bright Futures. That's on Thursday night. Tracy Dobmeyer and Wendy Katzman, 7 o'clock on Thursday. Big thanks, though, to all of you for coming tonight. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one.